And officially, welcome to everyone. I'm also going to start sharing my screen. So, welcome to Article 2 2.0. Uh, Loading, there we go. And I've called it this because, as you know, there have been some revisions after the previous round of edits and amendments. And so now the newest version, the most updated version, has been released, and this text will reflect that. But before we jump into Article 2, let's light our chalice. Well, we gather together to explore what makes us us, to think about what is essential, to share our hopes and our fears for the future. May the light of this chalice illuminate a space where we can bring our whole selves in a way that is brave, bold, and vulnerable. May we be a beloved community. So, a little about what we're going to do tonight. So, tonight we will have a chance to share what we find essential about being a Unitarian Universalist. We're then going to hear the most updated version of Article 2, sort of a deep listening exercise. My hope is that we start with a search for truth, meaning, and beauty in what's there together, and we'll be sort of sharing a little bit about that. We'll have a chance to share our fears and hopefully have them held in kindness. And then before we go, I would like to introduce you to Jet Pig, but more about Jet Pig later. What we won't do tonight is talk much about process and procedures. So if you were here to sort of, talk about the amendment process or the voting process or what might happen in the process at GA this coming year, that's not going to be tonight. We'll have other Article 2 times to talk more about that aspect of the process later, but that's not really the intention for tonight. I'm also imagining that tonight is not really going to be an evening of debating or convincing. So not so much tonight about sharing like pro or con, yes or no, yay or nay. It's more tonight about the first step of experiencing the words and our initial response to Article 2. And as I said already, we're not going to focus much on how we might vote. And so before we get to Article 2, I'd like to take a moment to think about this question and give us a chance to share our answers. So the question is, what is essential to you about being a Unitarian Universalist? And what I'd like us to do is take a full, minute and a half. I will time us a full 90 seconds after I'm done running my mouth to really sit and think about what is it about being a Unitarian Universalist that is essential to us. What's essential in that? And I would like us for both time and numbers and sort of ease of sharing, but also for clarity, to really try to distill that down to a single sentence or two sentences at the most. So, not an essay or a dissertation, but really think about if you had to sum up what is essential about being a Unitarian Universalist for you in a sentence or two max. How would you phrase that? What would be your essential? So we're going to pause for a good 90 seconds as you think about that. And while we do that, I'm going to stop my screen share. And after that 90 seconds, we'll have some time for people to share out what their essential thing is. 90 seconds is an incredibly long time in silence, isn't it? So feel free to just unmute and popcorn out. You can also type it in the chat if you prefer. And remember, a sentence or two at the most. What is essential for you about being a Unitarian Universalist?
I'd say open to various ideas of religion and spirituality.
Thank you.
Being involved in the religious and spiritual lives of others who accept me.
Thank you.
Freedom of thought.
Thank you.
We are a community of learners, and therefore we are open to transformation.
Thank you. See in the chat that to me, the absence of tribalism, a faith that seeks to embrace all of humanity. Thank you for that, Steve.
I would say personal search for our own truth, but within the community.
Thank you. Also see in the chat being responsible for my religious beliefs and working in community to live those beliefs in my life. Thank you, other Steve, for that.
I'm going to, this is Tony. I'm going to add that expanding my own awareness of how oppressive systems work so I can push back and create a more just system.
Thank you. See in the chat from Lali, the community that is open to the search for spiritual wisdom. Thank you.
Being having a community that I can be an asset with and for.
Thank you. Any others before we move on who haven't shared yet?
I was just going to say, this is Drew, a community of people that in generally accept challenges, interpersonal challenges.
Thank you. Any others? Okay, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. And I'm going to invite you, if you would like to, you may find this next part beneficial to have a pen or pencil and paper in front of you. If you don't have to. I'm going to read through Article 2 in its fullness. It's not terribly long. It's long enough, but not a burden of length. But as I read it, I'm going to invite us to start by listening to identify in. So what do I mean by that? Two quotes jump to mind. One is St. Francis in the prayer of St. Francis, may not seek so much to be understood as to understand. And the other is the philosopher and theologian Paul Tillich, who reminds us that the first duty of love is to listen. And so I think so often, I know this is true for me, if I come to something that I'm sort of familiar with, but not intimately familiar with, I will bring all of my preconceptions and, and what I'm thinking to it. And I will automatically start listening for like where my points are valid. And I want to sort of have us take a step back from that and really just listen to identify in. So as I read it to you, the words will be on the screen. Each line will be numbered if you're taking notes on any of this and you want to reference the line number. And I'm going to ask you to do really two things as we go. One is to seek out, in the words of Article 2, where is my essential thing? So whatever you just shared, or even if you thought and held that essential thing in silence, try and find that in Article 2. in the wording. Where is that? Does it show up? Maybe it shows up once, twice, maybe it's all throughout. And then the second thing is more general. What stands out in the words as meaningful, true, and or beautiful? And so we'll start from that perspective. And again, trying to identify into the text about, where do I find things that I identify with? So just to recap, the two tasks as you hear the words are, where is my essential thing in the text? And what stands out as meaningful, true, and or beautiful? And as I mentioned, as I'm reading, I'm going to turn my face off so I can see the words. So I can't see you during this process, so I'm going to trust that you're still there. And the words, the lines are numbered, as you can see along the side, if you wanted to reference that in your notes. So here we go. Article 2, Purposes and Covenant. Section C2.1, Purposes. Unitarian Universalist Association will devote its resources to and use its organizational powers for religious, educational, and humanitarian purposes. Its primary purposes are to assist congregations in their vital ministries, to support and train leaders, both lay and professional, to foster lifelong faith formation and spiritual development, to heal historic injustices, to support and encourage the creation of new Unitarian Universalist communities, and to advance our Unitarian Universalist values in the world. The Unitarian Universalist Association will actively engage its members in the transformation of the world through liberating love. Section C2.2, Values and Covenant. As Unitarian Universalists, we covenant, congregation to congregation, and through our association, to support and assist one another in our ministries. We draw from our heritages of freedom, reason, hope, and courage, building on the foundation of love. Love is the power that holds us together and is at the center of our shared values. We are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love. Inseparable from one another, these shared values are interdependence. We honor the interdependent web of all existence. With reverence for the great web of life and with humility, we acknowledge our place in it. We covenant to protect Earth and all beings from exploitation. We will create and nurture sustainable relationships of care and respect, mutuality and justice. We will work to repair harm and damaged relationships. Pluralism. We celebrate we celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. We covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. Justice. We work to be diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where all thrive. We covenant to dismantle racism and all forms of systemic oppression. We support the use of inclusive democratic processes to make decisions within our congregations, our association, and society at large. Transformation. We adapt to the changing world. We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. Openness to change is fundamental to our Unitarian Universalist heritages, never complete and never perfect. Generosity. We cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. We covenant to freely and compassionately share our faith, presence, and resources. Our generosity connects us to one another in relationships of interdependence and mutuality. Equity. We declare that every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness. We covenant to use our time, wisdom, attention, and money to build and sustain fully accessible and inclusive communities. Section C 2.3, Inspirations. Direct experiences of transcending mystery and wonder are primary sources of Unitarian Universalist inspiration. These experiences open our hearts, renew our spirits, and transform our lives. We draw upon and are inspired by sacred, secular, and scientific understandings that help us make meaning and live into our values. These sources ground us and sustain us in ordinary, difficult, and joyous times. We respect the histories, contexts, and cultures in which these sources were created and are currently practiced. Grateful for the experiences that move us, aware of the religious ancestries we inherit, and enlivened by the diversity which enriches our faith, we are called to ever deepen and expand our wisdom. Section C 2.4, Inclusion. Systems of power, privilege, and oppression have traditionally created barriers for persons and groups with particular identities, ages, abilities, and histories. We pledge to replace such barriers with ever-widening circles of solidarity and mutual respect. We strive to be an association of congregations that truly welcome all persons who share our values. We commit to being an association of congregations that empowers and enhances everyone's participation, especially those with historically marginalized identities. And section C 2.5, Freedom of Belief. Congregational freedom and the individual's right of conscience are central to our Unitarian Universalist heritage. Congregations may establish statements of purpose, covenants, and bonds of union, so long as they do not require that members adhere to a particular creed. So once again, I'm going to stop my screen share and open some time for the general question of what was that like to experience? Where did you find your essential thing, if you found it? And what stuck out to you as true or beautiful in the text? And I think it's okay if we just sort of unmute and speak. You can certainly put it in the chat. Just ask you to be mindful of, you know, taking space and making space for everybody to have a chance to share. What was that experience like?
So Tony, I can speak. Something that I found really beautiful was the interdependence, and that really resonates with me, especially at this time in the history of the earth. And so I really like that. Something that I was a little concerned about was the statement that we will embrace everyone who, and ask everyone to join us who shares our values. Because I've had conversations with people who have talked about the fact that in the past, the UU movement may have been more diverse, especially politically. And I could easily see somebody who's a Republican being told you don't share our values, which is not a thing I would want to have happen. So I think, that's just what came up for me. I'll stop there.
Thank you. I should add too, and I should have added this before we started, but I want to add it before we start the next person. We're also going to try this evening to just share out our own thoughts and not respond to something that somebody else said. So we want to sort of share as a circle, not as a direct comment on what someone else said. So with that, I'll continue. What was that experience like for you? What did you find? Kathy, go ahead.
Oh, this is Mike. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, good. I particularly like the change on line 32 that made a much stronger statement. I think in earlier versions, it was rather weak when they say that we will adapt to our history of oppression and racism. And I like the way they changed that. We will be committed to dismantling racism. One's very passive, saying, we'll adapt to it. That's almost like we were saying we would accept our history. And so I think this is a much stronger statement.
Thank you. Kathy Smith, I saw you had your hand up a moment ago. You're on. Just go ahead.
Yes. I feel like I'm being a little jaded here, but I feel like it's a mush pot, and so we can just say. I worked a long time ago with the YWCA and in a problematic situation in the beginning of integration, and we talked about ending racism, and I just throw up my hands at that. I think it's noble. But just that verb of ending, how does one even do that? Responding, yes. I mean, there might be some other verbs. It'd be a great circle to be in, to explore that, because it's so huge. And the second thing, and I've spoken of it before, is I'm just uncomfortable because I don't understand, or I don't appreciate, or not I appreciate, but I know that we also use love, which is a big word and loaded in lots of different ways. And I get a little confused with using that word so much. As I myself, I care a lot, I'm concerned, I'm compassionate, but I don't usually see myself as loving. And I mean, I could be, but I just don't understand that. That's it.
Thank you. I want to pause, and I want to say this in a non-judging or a non-shaming way, but I do want to call us back to the question, which was, where did you find what was essential for you, and what do you find true, meaningful, or beautiful? And I would ask you to trust me that there will be time in the next wave for the fears and the concerns and the criticisms. And I do want to hold those with kindness, because I know we're talking about essential things, and that can be a big, scary conversation that we have just concerns about. But for this share back, do your best to focus on where was your essential thing, and what you found true, beautiful, or meaningful in what we just read.
If I could just respond, I'd have a better relationship, interrelationships. I'll just say that. Stretching out with compassion, that would be an essential thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Valerie, go ahead.
So for me, I was jotting things down, and of course I wrote numbers and then promptly forgot what they what they relate to. But I wrote down number 8 and number 10, and it was something about justice, something like that. Can you see it, Tony? Remind me what those are.
Number 8 it's part of our purposes for the UUA. Number 8 was to heal historic injustices. And
yes.
What was the other one?
10.
10 was to advance our Unitarian Universalist values in the world.
Yes, yes. Those were the two things that felt really essential to me in my life, and in my relationship to the church. I really liked the interdependence bit. That felt real beautiful, the way that was addressed there. That I really like that a lot.
Valerie, Tony, can you read line 24, 25, and 26 of the independence paragraph? Because I agree with Valerie. That struck me as essential.
Sure, absolutely. Let me try and get it on my phone so it's mildly bigger than a. So this is part of the interdependence paragraph. We covenant to protect Earth and all its beings from exploitation, We will create and nurture sustainable relationships of care and respect, mutuality and justice. We will work to repair harm and damaged relationships.
There you go. That's it. I vote for that. Oh yeah, we're not talking about
what we're voting yet.
Okay, got it.
But you can affirm that.
Okay, I affirm it.
This is Drew again. I don't know the first part of the sentence, but we're an association without creeds.
Thank you. Steve Howard, I see your hand.
Yeah. I really appreciated the longer, more of a description of these things than the current principles and purposes. Those are very short sentences. This was a little more more about that, and that just felt really good to me.
Yes, and one of the reasons I wanted to sort of read through the entire text is in many of the presentations I've seen the graphic with the words, and I think there might be a misconception that like that's all there is just a list of values. And so, you know, one of the things that I find really meaningful about this is that for each of those values, there's sort of a definition or sort of a declarative sentence or two, and then they're all followed up with an active we covenant to. I hear that as sort of a therefore this is what we're going to do about it, and I personally value that in this way of doing it. What's it like for others?
Uh, 50, 57, when you got to line 57, I saw what I wrote about being the essential part of being a UU, about others who accept me.
Yeah, line 57 is sort of the middle of a sentence, but here is that sentence. We pledge to replace such barriers with ever widening circles of solidarity and mutual respect. We strive to be an association of congregations that truly welcome all persons who share our values. Thank you.
I guess one thing that I remember is inspirations when it was going into different, well, that was a little bit about what my idea was. It was going into different faiths and even science and all a variety of different sources. And I really liked that idea.
Thank you. And yes, there's been a lot of talk about the values. You know, Article 2 is also the space where we traditionally have defined the sources of our faith. And this iteration talks about how it's not sources. What's the word they use? Inspirations.
Yes.
And it's a much broader definition. You know, it's not the list that the other thing was. I see a hand. Susan.
Hi. I like the focus on transformation. It gets its own little section in this version. And I think it's a really important word. So we're not just doing this. If you can't see that because of my my background, but transforming is a very important part of what I believe in and is meaningful to me.
Thank you.
Following up on what just Susan said, so I wrote down number 27 and then 29, 30, and 35. I think it's about learners and transformation, if I remember correctly.
Yes, 27 is about it was 27 you said?
Yes.
With pluralism, we celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. What was the other one, Rosalba?
29 and 29:30, I wrote.
That's the next paragraph. We covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect.
And then 35.
35 was transformation. We adapt to the changing world.
Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. I love these numbers. They're taking me back to my Catholic bingo days.
I can't read my writing, so but curiosity, interdependence, and the democratic process.
Thank you. Thought I saw another hand flash. Any others of what anybody else experienced or what jumped out at you? Right. So, I'd like to transition us into the next sort of round of thinking. And like before, I'm going to ask a question and then pause for a moment so we can really sort of gather our thoughts. And for this one, I'm going to ask us to start in the chat. So if you're sort of unfamiliar with Zoom, the chat is down there at the bottom bar. It's got a little sort of text bubble and it says chat. And if you click on that, you can then click where it says type a message here and you can type in there if you'd like to. So here's the thought. As promised, this is the moment when we can talk about sort of the things that concern us, but I want to frame it in a very particular way. So hear this question exactly as I'm saying it. Thinking about either the process of what's about to come over the next few months leading up to the vote at GA, or the Article 2 itself, the content or the process. Not necessarily what's happened already. We're at a place where now the process is where it is. So I want us to sort of start from that starting point. But here's the question. What fears do you have? And I'm phrasing it as a fear intentionally because I really want us to get down to like, what am I really, just to use the word again, like what am I afraid of in terms of what the next few months leading up to GA might bring, either in terms of the process from now until then, or in terms of the content. Should Article 2 pass or not? And there might be fears related to what happens if it passes, what the consequence of that would be, and there might be fears related to what happens if it doesn't pass, and what the consequences of that might be. And so again, take a moment to think about that, really distill it down to what fears do I have about that, if any. And when you're ready, I'd like to start the process by having everybody, before anyone speaks, give a chance for everybody to type that in the chat. And I'm still here timing us. I'm just going to turn my video off for a brief second.
Tony, are you talking?
It was the most eloquent thing I've said all evening, and unfortunately, the moment was bad. No, I was saying now that we've had a chance to write it down in the chat, and hopefully you've had a chance to take a look at that. If not, you can open up the chat and scroll through it. Um, I will notice, and this is not true of everything, but I noticed that the the main theme I'm reading in many of the fears are around the process and around the sort of uh, the conflict maybe resulting from either passing or not. That that our fears seem to be centered in aggregate around the um, about the people in the process, which in a way I think is interesting that there's not, I don't see a whole bunch of concern. I'm not saying it's not there, but I don't see a whole bunch of concern about the theology of the document or the content or the values. That it's really, it's us that we seem to be fearing. It's each other and the fallout of the process. So with that, I will stop my running commentary and ask now if you would like to unmute and share out, and hopefully we can hold that in kindness. What are some of your fears? And again, I'm going to ask that we not try and sort of problem solve each other or respond to each other, but just an opportunity to share out and listen.
So, Tony, I'm not sure I totally agree that it's just us that we fear, because I think the view that democracy has been emphasized less in the new document than as a explicitly stated principle in the former principles is one that is of concern as a matter of content, and not as a matter of people. Although people are certainly, being acrimonious about it.
That's fair. Thank you.
I have personally a problem with the word love. I think love has to be based in trust. And I don't think, and love can have so many different interpretations. So I would like, when, help me with the name of our new president, Sofia Betancourt came, she used the term communal care. I would rather have that at the center, communal care, than love. Thank you.
Thank you. Others, what are some of your fears or concerns? Susan, go ahead.
This was mentioned. The only thing I circled when I looked online and saw the form that shows both versions side by side, the only thing I didn't like in the new one was that phrase, who share our values. I think that that's a little exclusionary. I'm thinking, okay, we have someone who values reason, but not individual experience. Oh, well, you can't come here. They might think that it means that. I just think that phrase bothers me a little bit. The rest of it, I think, is quite lovely.
Thank you.
I guess I'm still thinking about accountability in some way. How do we know we're doing it? How do we evaluate how we're doing? So the process is, I don't personally have a feeling on the UUA hearing what they want us to do or whatever. And when I went as a delegate, I wasn't representing the church, the congregation. I was representing me, which doesn't make any sense.
Thank you. Angela, I see your comment in the chat that you can't seem to unmute. I'm going to try and ask you to unmute and see if that solves the problem. Did that change anything for you? Seems not. Well, sorry about that. I'm not sure what that is. But I do see your comment in the chat. The new version sounds lovely, yet is even more ambiguous than the principles. Others?
Yeah, I need help writing in the chat. So that's just another thing way down the line, helping people, us old people.
Oh, I don't know about that old. But so here's your chance. What feel free to share it out loud at this point.
Well, no, I tried to. It's just in general, it's there are stumbling blocks. It's like, where do you find things? How do you know where to go to, and so forth and so on.
Other fears or concerns? One more. How long is this version likely to last? You know, as I understand it, we're supposed to review it every year or so. I don't know that there will be major revisions. Justine's saying no. Justine, you may know better than I. What's in the bylaws in terms of reviewing Article 2?
Under the bylaws, we're supposed to review our bylaws at least every 15 years.
Right.
So it'll be a while before we look at this again. I mean, there's nothing to stop someone from bringing a motion to look at it again, but we won't be required to look at it again for some time.
Thank you for that. I was giving you a lot more work. We don't want to go through this every year? Steve, go ahead.
Well, I said this in the chat, but I just have a small bit of nostalgia for the for the existing 8 principles. You know, that they were I encountered those for the first time when I came back to the church in the 80s, and they've been a very comforting thing to me, and I almost had them memorized. And this is just new, but so that's just resistance to change. But I wouldn't. That's not a reason to not support the new version.
Thank you.
I had the opposite reaction, is that when I first came to the church, I thought, what are these people talking about? You know, these things can mean just about anything, you know. So I really appreciate the greater clarity that this brings.
Thank you. Any others?
This is a process question. I don't know if it's appropriate for now, about the voting. Now, how is it decided? Does every congregation get one vote, or does a larger congregation get more?
So, Justine, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is the delegates vote on this at GA, and the delegates are assigned to the congregations by by size. Yes. Yeah. So just like any other sort of vote at GA, it would be the delegates from each congregation that they're voting, and they're sort of calculated by size, sort of like Congress is.
I'm curious how many people here have gone to GA.
Gone. I see quite a few hands. And it's online this year, so if travel is a barrier or money, it's incredibly cheaper to go online.
I think the year that I was a delegate, it was online.
Mm. Yeah, my first GA was online. And then I've also been to one in person. Right. Any more fears before I move us along?
I'm Kathy. I guess I don't know if you can see me or not, but my picture fell with somewhere in the house here, and I can't find it. My video mechanism, and I was thinking, I keep thinking this in my mind. It doesn't mean that we're erasing the 8 principles. Well, number 8 hasn't been technically approved by, hasn't. Um, and it's not like we're erasing them, and we can always go back to refer to them, you know, when we're talking to someone, if there just might be some reason that we might want to go back and refer to that.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, this is my first experience as a UU with really deciding this kind of theology at this level. And it is interesting going through a theological conversation in the bylaws, like that's sort of a quirk of who we are, is that our theology is expressed in a document like the bylaws. We don't have sort of a scripture to refer to, or a separate theological text to look at. And so in a way, I found it both frustrating and fascinating and engaging um, to sort of watch the ways in which the sort of process of bylaws and sort of this very board structure bylaw process just bangs up against the theological and values based and spiritual discussions, and that creates a really unique kind of beast that is new to me in terms of a theological discussion.
So we are a creedless religion. So these new bylaws are more spiritual than theological, wouldn't you say? Or it has to do with emotions. It doesn't. Theo means God, doesn't it? I don't know.
Say that again, Kathy. Did you say feel means God?
What is the understanding of the preface Theo.
Oh, yes. I mean, literally, theos is God. So theology would be sort of the study of God. But I, I think, and I'm sorry if I was confusing. I use the term more generally to mean sort of like religious or spiritual belief, or sort of the study of a spiritual system. But yes, you're right. Literally, it means the study of God. Susan.
I guess this is a minor concern because it's my job to come up with a new elevator speech. The principles have been a very easy way to me to explain to people what my church is about. And, you know, without maybe showing them the graphic, I'm not sure of an equally simple way to explain it based on this.
Well, hold that thought, because actually put a pin in that, because I saw Steve's hand and I don't want to cut people off. Steve,
No, that's
Yeah, I just thought that it feels like we've dropped some ballast from the previous to this one, some anchoring, and particularly the anchoring in the religious traditions that the movements came out of that are named at the beginning. And I guess that could feel really freeing and liberating, but it also could feel kind of scary and dangerous, because there's always, you know, the fear of just adapting to the latest psychological trends, in terms of what people are talking about and feeling. Like, yeah, we're all into saving the earth right now, but what about 20 years from now when it's destroyed? No.
There you go. All right. Well, I'm going to share my screen again. And I must say, this is the behind the curtain. I expected, when I asked you to share your fears, that there would be a torrent of discussion and objection. And I have to say, I'm kind of heartened that, I'm not trying to downplay anybody's, the fears that were shared, I think are important and valid, but there weren't as many of them, honestly, if I'm being honest, as I expected. And so I guess I find that heartening. My next encouragement to you was going to be to fear not. And I think, we hear this a lot, this phrase, especially in Judeo-Christian traditions. I put them in the wings and halo because it's the first word out of every angel's mouth in the Judeo-Christian scriptural tradition. And for me, as a metaphor, what that means is that when we encounter, when we encounter the divine, when we encounter things that are essential to us, and especially when we're discussing and debating and even voting on what's essential to us, that can be a scary process. And I've certainly been fearful myself of that process, and also fearful of what potential outcome could mean in terms of individual relationships and people's relationships to the UUA and the church as a whole. But I really try and pull myself back to this sort of message, or even command, if you will, to fear not. And I think for me, what that means is to try and lean into, when I can, the trust that I have in all of us, that we as a community have the ability to figure this out. I think our relationships can be stronger than our fear if we let them. And I certainly don't think this is no matter what happens in June, this is not a deal breaker. When I put my relationships that I have with you all and the UUA as a whole, and my colleagues nationally, that on the scales outweighs anything that may or may not get voted on in June. But to Susan's question about the elevator speech and how you might, refine that elevator speech with something other than the graphic, I would love to introduce you to JetPig. And so this is a device that the religious educators have come up with. And I meant to look it up on Facebook before we started tonight. I will credit her at some point, the religious educator who came up with JetPig. When she realized that if you take the first letter of the 6 values, you can spell JetPig. And so if you are stumped when somebody says, if this is the way we define ourselves in the future, let's pretend that this is a future where Article 2 has passed, and you're in the elevator and somebody says, "Hey, you're a UU. What do you all believe?" You say, "Well, let me introduce you to JetPig. We believe in justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, and generosity, with love at the center." And this is just my AI assistant rendering of JetPig, but I can guarantee you that you are going to see any number of little piggies with jetpacks on their backs in the next 2 or 3 months. I'm already seeing some online. There's a children's book called If that is the premise is based on this little kid wondering like if this, if that, and one of the ifs is if pigs fly. And with this little book, you can get a little piggy that has like an aviator goggles on his head, and many religious educators are buying that pig and then putting a homemade jetpack on his back. And so I think this is one way I wanted to end on a sort of a lighthearted. This is one way that you can give your elevator speech. Just think of the jet pig.
Thank you. That I like that.
You're welcome.
And tell us again what it means.
So the letters in JetPig are the values. So justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, and generosity, or JEP.
The I could also be inclusion.
It could, but that's not one of the 6 values that they named.
In my elevator speech, it will be.
There you go. Be JetPig.
Yes.
I'm just really grateful to hear people engaging in this way on spiritual matters on a Friday night. I just and Tony, you do such a beautiful job of convening these gatherings where we can engage one another. So thank you for
thank you
bringing us together, and for the work you put into preparing this and giving us a place to share our the moments of connection and also our fears, because both are important, and we need to be able to talk openly together about what we gain and what we worry we might lose. So it's important.
Absolutely. And thank you for saying that. As I mentioned, my goal for tonight was to just give us sort of an introduction. Really, the bulk of my goal was to expose us to reading the words. So this will not be the end of the conversation this year leading to GA. Obviously, we will be talking about Article 2 and even more about sort of the process. And, I know there are questions about the delegates and how do we decide how to vote and those kinds of questions. Those are coming. So again, if you were coming to tonight with more of those kinds of questions, I think those are super important questions, and we will be answering those as we move through the rest of the year. But I also really appreciate just you all coming and sharing honestly about what you experienced and how you interact with the text as it is.
Yes, it's very communal. It feels good to have this way of talking about something for you're organizing it and give us little scaffolding, and then we be ourselves and we come to it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I say all the time that I love where I get to go to work every day. I really do love all of you and the community I'm a part of. And so thank you for having these conversations with us, and look forward to more to come.
And Tony, I'm just going to ask you at the very beginning, you said, you quoted St. Francis to understand more than to be understood, and there was another one I didn't.
That was Paul Tillich. The first duty of love is to listen.
Okay, thanks.
All right, friends. Well, you get an early night tonight at 7:35. Thank you all for coming. I'll post the recording probably early next week, and hope to see you all soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
You're welcome.